The Texas Mafia boss walks into a charity gala and finds his ex-wife, the woman he believed abandoned him 5 years ago. What he discovers next destroys everything. The evening sun barely touched the stained glass windows of the Rosewood mansion when Eggert Bobby walked in. Not just any man, the Eggert Bobby. Texas's most feared mafia boss. The man who controlled everything from Dallas's blood-soaked underground fights to the political puppets in Austin's Capitol building. He wasn't supposed to see her. This wasn't supposed to happen. But fate has a cruel way of orchestrating the most devastating reunions when you've convinced yourself the past is buried. Daisy Kraut had her back turned, adjusting the sleeve of her emerald gown near the champagne fountain, the delicate scent of her perfume, jasmine and something darker, still the same after all these years. Her shoulders are bare, elegant. The woman he'd once called his wife, now a ghost he thought he'd never see again. When the ballroom doors opened and his security swept in, she didn't immediately turn. Just continued her conversation with the councilman beside her, her laughter soft and controlled. But then the gala went silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that falls when a predator enters a room full of prey. The kind of silence that makes the air itself feel dangerous to breathe. She turned. And their eyes met across the marble floor. Time collapsed between them. 5 years of separation evaporated in a single heartbeat. His gray eyes widened, first in recognition, then in something far more dangerous. Shock. Rage. Disbelief. His gaze locked on her face, scanning for answers, for explanations, for the truth she'd stolen from him. She stood there in that emerald dress that fit her like armor, confidence and elegance radiating from her like she hadn't destroyed him. Like she hadn't vanished without a trace. Like she hadn't made him believe she'd chosen to leave. Daisy. Just her name. Just 2 syllables from his lips. But they hit her like a physical blow. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble in a violent explosion of crystal and liquid. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Golden champagne splattered across the pristine white floor like blood. 5 years of careful hiding. 5 years of rebuilding in the shadows. Destroyed in an instant. You shouldn't be here. Her voice barely a whisper. Her hands trembling as she stepped back, eyes already searching for escape. For the exits. For anything that could save her from this moment. His eyes never left her face. Don't. She was already moving. Backing away. Looking for an exit, for her coat, for any way out of this nightmare. The councilman beside her stepped back instinctively, sensing the danger crackling between them. Eggert moved faster than anyone could track. One moment across the ballroom. The next, his hands shot out, fingers closing around her wrist as she stumbled. Not painfully. But with enough pressure to make it crystal clear. She wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. His touch burned against her skin. Familiar yet foreign. A memory made flesh. After so many years of silence, of separation, of believing lies. The entire ballroom froze. His men materialized at every door. She hadn't even noticed them enter. Black suits. Dead eyes. Standing like sentinels. The Dallas elite stood paralyzed mid-conversation. Champagne glasses suspended. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone understood the danger crackling in the air between them. Before we dive into what tore them apart and the deadly secrets that could destroy them both, if you're already hooked by this story, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. The betrayal runs deeper than you think. Eggert's grip on her wrist loosened, but he didn't let go. He couldn't. 5 years of questions, 5 years of rage, 5 years of waking up in empty beds wondering what he'd done wrong, all of it surged through him like poison. Daisy pulled her hand free with a sharp tug and stepped back. Her eyes met his with a steadiness that shocked him. No fear. No guilt. Just cold, calculated composure. She turned and walked away. Not ran. Walked. Through the crowd of frozen elites, past the champagne fountain, toward the grand staircase that led to the mansion's private rooms. Each step deliberate. Controlled. Like she owned the space. Like she hadn't just shattered his world for the second time. Eggert stood paralyzed. His mind screamed at him to move, to chase her down, to drag her back and demand answers. Where had she been? Why did she leave? Why was she here now, in his city, at this gala, as if nothing had happened? But something in her calm unraveled him. The woman he remembered had been softer. Vulnerable. She'd needed him once, or so he thought. She'd clung to him in the early days of their marriage, sought his protection, his power. But this woman, this Daisy, moved through the room like she needed no one. His heartbeat hammered in his ears. Anger twisted with something he refused to name. Longing. Regret. The memory of her laugh in the mornings, her hand in his during quiet nights when the Mafia world felt too heavy. He'd convinced himself she was a traitor. That she'd chosen another life. Another man, maybe. That the letters his lieutenant showed him were real. That she'd written those cold, cutting words herself. But now, seeing her again, doubt crept in like a knife between his ribs. She glanced back once. Just once. Her green eyes locked on his, and for a fraction of a second, he saw something flicker beneath the surface. Pain. Fear. Something buried deep. Then she disappeared through the doorway at the top of the stairs. The ballroom erupted into whispers. Phones appeared. Texts flew. The Dallas elite had just witnessed Eggert Bobby, the man who never lost control, standing frozen in the middle of a gala while his ex-wife walked away from him. His men waited for orders. They always did. One word and they'd have her in a car within seconds. But Eggert didn't move. He realized something that terrified him more than any rival gang, any federal investigation, any bullet with his name on it. He'd underestimated her. Underestimated her strength. Her resolve. The walls she'd built around herself in the years they'd been apart. And worse, he'd underestimated the danger of his own emotions. He wasn't just a mafia boss anymore. He was a man undone by what he thought he'd lost. The years apart had carved different paths through both their lives, but neither had escaped unscathed. Daisy had disappeared into Dallas like smoke. No forwarding address. No trail. Just gone. She'd chosen the city deliberately. Close enough to monitor Eggert's world from a distance, far enough to stay invisible. She moved between charity galas and private security consulting, building a reputation under a carefully constructed identity. The work kept her sharp, kept her connected to the underbelly of power without drowning in it. But it was the secret she carried that kept her awake at night. The truth she'd buried so deep that even thinking about it felt dangerous. A truth that, if Eggert ever discovered it, would either destroy him or ignite a war she wasn't sure anyone could survive. She'd learned to live with the weight. Learned to smile at fundraisers, shake hands with politicians, and pretend the past didn't claw at her every time she heard his name whispered in back rooms and boardrooms. Eggert, meanwhile, had done what he did best. He consolidated power. Expanded territory. Crushed rivals. His empire grew from Dallas to Houston, from underground gambling to legitimate real estate, from feared to untouchable. But every victory tasted like ash. He'd stand in penthouses overlooking the city, whiskey in hand, and feel nothing. The thrill of conquest had died the night Daisy left. His bed was never empty, there were always women willing to warm it, but none of them stayed. None of them mattered. His lieutenant had told him she'd betrayed him. Showed him letters. Bank transfers. Evidence that she'd been planning her escape for months, that she'd never loved him, that she'd only married him for protection and money. Eggert had believed it because the alternative was too painful. That he'd failed her. That his world had been too dark, too violent, too suffocating for someone like her to survive in. The nights were the worst for both of them. Daisy would lie awake replaying their last fight. The way he'd looked at her with such cold fury. The accusations. The way he'd shut down, refused to listen, refused to believe her when she swore she hadn't done what he claimed. Eggert replayed it too. Every word. Every moment he'd chosen pride over truth. Every time he could have reached out, could have searched for her, could have demanded answers instead of accepting lies. The silence between them had never been empty. It had been a battlefield. Regrets piled like bodies. Unspoken truths festered like wounds. Emotional scars thickened into armor that neither of them knew how to remove. She'd convinced herself he'd never loved her enough to fight for the truth. He'd convinced himself she'd never loved him at all. Both were wrong. And tonight, in that ballroom, the silence had finally shattered. 6 years earlier, Austin had been alive with the kind of humid summer heat that made everything feel slower, heavier, more deliberate. The charity gala at the Four Seasons had drawn the usual crowd. Politicians pretending to care, oil tycoons writing checks for tax breaks, socialites hunting for gossip. Eggert Bobby had only attended because one of his shell companies was listed as a donor. Appearances mattered in his line of work. Legitimacy was a mask he wore well. He'd been nursing a bourbon near the bar when he saw her. Daisy Kraut stood near the auction table, her midnight blue dress simple but striking. She wasn't trying to be noticed, which made her impossible to ignore. While others laughed too loud and posed for photographers, she studied the auction catalog with genuine interest, her fingers tracing the descriptions of art pieces up for bid. Eggert watched her for 20 minutes before approaching. He'd built an empire on reading people, on knowing when to strike and when to wait. But with her, instinct took over. He'd walked up, leaned against the table beside her, and said something forgettable about the overpriced sculpture she was examining. She'd looked up at him with eyes that were sharper than he expected. Green and assessing. Not impressed by his suit or the way people stepped aside when he moved through the room. "You're Eggert Bobby," she'd said. Not a question. A statement. She knew exactly who he was. "And you're wondering if you should walk away," he'd replied. She'd smiled then. Small. Cautious. "I'm wondering if you're as dangerous as people say." More. That honesty had surprised her. Most men in his position lied. Pretended to be legitimate businessmen. She appreciated the truth, even when it came wrapped in warning. Their conversation had stretched from minutes to an hour. She was a freelance security consultant, specializing in risk assessment for nonprofits and private clients. Smart. Independent. The kind of woman who didn't need saving but knew how to handle danger when it found her. Eggert had pursued her relentlessly after that night. Flowers delivered to her office. Invitations to dinners at restaurants that didn't take reservations. Calls at midnight just to hear her voice. He balanced charm with the subtle weight of his power, never threatening but always present. Daisy had been cautious. She knew what his world meant. The violence. The betrayals. The constant risk. But she'd also been intrigued by his intensity, by the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. He'd promised her protection without saying the words. Promised her a life where she could remain independent but never alone. Where her strength would be valued, not suppressed. 3 months later, they were married in a private ceremony in Hill Country. No press. No fanfare. Just them, a judge, and 2 witnesses who knew how to keep their mouths shut. The bond had been immediate and deep. Eggert had never let anyone that close before. Daisy became the one person who saw past the Mafia boss to the man underneath. She challenged him. Made him laugh. Grounded him when the weight of his empire threatened to crush him. But the bond was also fragile. Every moment together was heightened by the knowledge that his world was a loaded gun. Rival gangs. Federal investigations. Betrayals from within his own organization. Daisy had known the risks, had accepted them, but living with them was different. There were nights when she'd wake to find him gone, called away to handle some crisis. Mornings when blood stained his knuckles and he wouldn't explain. Moments when she saw the violence in his eyes and wondered if love could survive in a world built on fear. She'd loved him anyway. And he'd loved her with an intensity that terrified him. She was his weakness. His vulnerability. The one thing that could be used against him. He'd tried to protect her by keeping parts of his world hidden. She'd tried to protect herself by maintaining her independence. Neither realized that their attempts at protection would become the cracks that others could exploit. Love had been thrilling. Dangerous. Intoxicating. But it had never been safe. The betrayal had come from the one place Eggert never expected. From within. Marcus Vallon had been Eggert's lieutenant for 8 years. Loyal. Efficient. Ruthless when needed. He'd climbed the ranks through competence and calculated violence, earning Eggert's trust through blood and results. But trust, in their world, was always conditional. Marcus had watched Daisy's influence grow with quiet resentment. She'd softened Eggert in ways that made him vulnerable. Made him hesitate before ordering hits. Made him question strategies that had always worked. She was a liability Marcus couldn't afford, not when his own ambitions depended on Eggert remaining the cold, decisive leader he'd always been. So Marcus had engineered the perfect lie. Forged letters appeared in Eggert's private safe. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts under Daisy's name. Photographs of her meeting with a man Marcus had paid to play the role of lover. Conversations recorded and edited to sound like conspiracy. The evidence was meticulous. Damning. Designed to prey on every insecurity Eggert carried about whether someone like Daisy could ever truly love someone like him. Marcus had delivered it personally, his face grave with false concern. I didn't want to believe it either, boss. But you need to see this. Eggert had looked at the evidence and felt his world collapse. The confrontation had been brutal. He'd cornered Daisy in their home, thrown the papers at her, demanded explanations she couldn't give because she had no idea what he was talking about. She'd never met that man. Never opened those accounts. Never written those letters. But Eggert hadn't listened. Couldn't listen. The pain was too raw, the betrayal too complete. Get out, he'd said. Voice cold. Final. Get out before I do something we'll both regret. Daisy had tried to reason with him. Tried to explain. But every word felt like confirmation of guilt to a man whose trust had just been weaponized against him. She'd left that night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that someone had destroyed them both. Eggert had lashed out in the weeks that followed. Consolidated power with brutal efficiency. Cut ties with anyone he suspected of disloyalty. Built walls so high that no one could reach him again. Daisy had retreated into the shadows. Her heart shattered. Her life dismantled. She'd spent months trying to understand what had happened, piecing together fragments of truth, but without access to Eggert's world, she'd hit dead ends at every turn. The betrayal had been invisible to outsiders. Just another Mafia marriage that couldn't survive the pressure. But the scars it left were permanent. Eggert learned to trust no one completely. Daisy learned that love could be destroyed by lies faster than it could be built by truth. Both carried the weight of that night into every decision that followed. And Marcus Vallon watched from the shadows, satisfied that his plan had worked perfectly. Eggert found her in the mansion's library. She'd known he would. Known he wouldn't let her disappear again without answers. She stood by the window, silhouetted against the Dallas skyline, her posture rigid. Waiting. He closed the door behind him. Locked it. The click echoed through the room like a death sentence. 5 years, he said. His voice was low. Controlled. Dangerous. 5 years and you walk back into my life like nothing happened. Daisy turned to face him. Her eyes were steady. Unflinching. I never left by choice. Don't lie to me. I saw the evidence. The letters. The accounts. The man you were meeting. Evidence Marcus showed you. Her voice cut through his anger like a blade. Evidence he fabricated. Eggert froze. What? Marcus Vallon set me up. He forged everything. The letters weren't mine. The accounts were opened in my name without my knowledge. That man in the photographs? I'd never seen him before in my life until Marcus's game was already in motion. The words hit him like bullets. Each one tearing through the foundations of everything he'd believed for 5 years. You're lying. Am I? She reached into her clutch and pulled out a flash drive. Walked toward him. Placed it in his hand. Bank records. Email trails. Testimony from the man Marcus paid to pose as my lover. I've spent 5 years gathering proof because I knew you'd never believe me without it. Eggert stared at the drive. His hand trembled. Rage and disbelief warred inside him. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Because Marcus wasn't working alone. Her voice dropped. Urgent now. There's corruption in your organization deeper than you know. Rivals are positioning to strike. The Mendoza cartel. The Russians. They've been waiting for the right moment to move on your territory, and Marcus has been feeding them information for years. His blood went cold. How do you know this? Because I've been watching. Tracking. I built a network to survive and discovered things I was never supposed to see. She stepped closer. Her voice calm but carrying an authority that shook him. Your shipment routes. Your safe houses. Your financial structures. Marcus sold all of it. And now they're ready to move. Eggert's mind raced. Everything he'd built. Everyone he'd trusted. It was rotting from the inside. When? Soon. Within days. Maybe less. The room felt smaller suddenly. The walls closing in. His empire, his life, everything balanced on the edge of collapse. He looked at Daisy. Really looked at her. Saw the exhaustion. The pain. The strength she'd had to forge alone in the years he'd cast her out. Why come back now? Why risk this? Her eyes softened. Just barely. Because despite everything, I couldn't let you die without knowing the truth. Trust shattered is never easily rebuilt. But survival demanded it. Their love was no longer just personal. It was war. I want to know, are you Team Eggert or Team Daisy? Who's been hurt more by this betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because stories like this don't come around often. The warehouse on the east side of Dallas had been Marcus Vallon's mistake. He'd chosen it because he thought it was secure. Off the grid. A place where he could meet with the Mendoza cartel's representatives without Eggert's knowledge. He hadn't counted on Daisy's network. Hadn't realized she'd been tracking his movements for months. Eggert arrived with 6 of his most trusted men. Not the ones Marcus had recommended. Not the ones on the usual rotation. Men Eggert had personally vetted, men whose loyalty was bought with blood and years of shared violence. Daisy was already inside. She'd entered through the back, bypassing security with the kind of precision that came from years of consulting on exactly these vulnerabilities. She'd mapped every exit, every sightline, every advantage Marcus thought he had. When Eggert's men kicked in the front doors, Marcus was caught mid-conversation with 2 Mendoza enforcers. The shock on his face was worth every sleepless night of the past 5 years. Eggert. Marcus's hand moved toward his weapon, but 3 guns were already trained on him. He froze. This isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Eggert's voice was ice. He stepped into the warehouse, his presence filling the space with barely contained rage. You sold me out. Destroyed my marriage. Fed my enemies everything they needed to bury me. Marcus's eyes darted to the Mendoza men, calculating odds, looking for escape. There was none. You were weak, Marcus spat. She made you weak. I was protecting the organization. By destroying it from the inside? Daisy emerged from the shadows behind Marcus. He spun, shock rippling across his face as he realized she'd been there the entire time. Listening. Watching. Surprise, she said quietly. The Mendoza enforcers made their move. One reached for his weapon. Eggert's men were faster. Gunfire erupted. Brief. Brutal. Efficient. When the smoke cleared, the enforcers were down. Marcus stood alone, surrounded, his confidence crumbling. You have a choice, Eggert said. Names. Every contact. Every deal. Every piece of information you sold. Marcus laughed. Bitter. Desperate. You think killing me fixes this? The damage is done. The Mendoza cartel knows everything. The Russians are already moving. You're finished. Maybe. Daisy stepped closer. But you won't be around to see it. Marcus lunged. Desperation made him reckless. Eggert moved faster. His fist connected with Marcus's jaw, sending him sprawling. The betrayer hit the concrete hard, gasping. Eggert stood over him. Years of rage. Years of pain. All focused on this moment. Blood demands blood, Eggert said. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Daisy stood beside Eggert, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined. No words needed. Victory wasn't clean. Justice never was. But the equilibrium had shifted. Eggert looked at her. Saw the strength he'd underestimated. The courage she'd carried alone for too long. Power alone couldn't protect what mattered. Trust could. And together, they were far more dangerous than Marcus had ever imagined. The retaliation came faster than expected. The Mendoza cartel didn't wait. Didn't negotiate. News of Marcus's death and the elimination of their enforcers reached them within hours, and they responded with the kind of violence that sent messages across state lines. They targeted Daisy. Eggert had moved her to a safe house on the outskirts of Dallas. High security. Trusted guards. Every precaution his experience demanded. But the Mendoza cartel had Marcus's intelligence. They knew Eggert's playbook better than he'd realized. The attack came at 2 a.m. 3 vehicles. 8 men. Military-grade weapons. Eggert was across town handling the fallout from Marcus's betrayal when the call came through. His head of security. Voice tight with panic. They breached the safe house. Daisy's inside. The world tilted. Everything slowed and accelerated at once. Eggert was moving before conscious thought caught up. His men scrambled to follow as he tore through Dallas streets, traffic laws meaningless. The only thing that mattered was getting to her before it was too late. Inside the safe house, Daisy had heard the first explosion. The front door blown inward. Gunfire erupting. Her guards returning fire, buying seconds she couldn't waste. She'd grabbed the weapon Eggert insisted she keep close. A Glock 19. Familiar weight. She'd trained for this scenario even when she prayed it would never come. The cartel soldiers moved through the house with professional efficiency. Room by room. Eliminating resistance. Hunting. Daisy positioned herself in the upstairs bedroom. Barricaded the door. Controlled her breathing. Waited. When the door splintered open, she fired. Clean shots. Center mass. The first man dropped. The second took cover. She used the momentary reprieve to move, repositioning to gain advantage. But there were too many. A bullet tore through her shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot. She stumbled, weapon slipping from her grip. Blood poured hot down her arm. The lead soldier stepped into the room. raised his weapon, smiled. The window behind him shattered. Eggert came through like a force of nature. Tackled the soldier before the shot fired. They hit the floor in a tangle of violence. Fists. Elbows. Brutal close-quarters combat. Eggert's men poured through the broken window. The gunfight intensified. Chaos consumed the room. Daisy grabbed her weapon with her good hand. Fired at a cartel soldier advancing on Eggert's blind side. The man went down. Eggert turned, saw her bleeding, and something primal tore through him. Fear he'd never acknowledged. Love he'd tried to bury. The possibility of losing her forever crashed over him like a wave. He fought with a desperation that bordered on madness. No calculation. No restraint. Just raw need to protect the one thing that mattered. When the last cartel soldier fell, silence descended. Heavy. Broken only by ragged breathing and distant sirens. Eggert crossed to Daisy. Dropped beside her. His hands shaking as he assessed the wound. "I'm okay," she said. Voice steady despite the pain. "You're not okay. You're bleeding." "I'm alive." She met his eyes. "We're alive." His forehead pressed against hers. Relief. Terror. Love. All of it colliding in the space between heartbeats. Their connection had survived betrayal. Survived years apart. Survived bullets and blood. Nothing could break what they'd forged together. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Daisy's shoulder had been stitched and bandaged, the bullet removed cleanly. She'd survive with minimal scarring, the doctor said. Physical scars, anyway. Eggert sat beside her bed as dawn broke over Dallas. His empire was in chaos. The Mendoza cartel had declared war. The Russians were circling. Marcus's betrayal had exposed weaknesses that rivals were eager to exploit. His phone had been ringing non-stop. His men needed orders. Decisions. The kind of ruthless, calculated moves that had built his empire in the first place. But Eggert couldn't look away from Daisy. She was awake now. Exhausted but alert. Watching him with those green eyes that saw too much. "You need to go," she said quietly. "Your organization needs you. They can wait." "Eggert. They can wait." His voice was firm. Final. He reached for her hand. "Careful of the four. I've spent 5 years choosing power over everything else. Over truth. Over you. I'm done making that mistake." Daisy's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can rebuild an empire. Money. Territory. Influence. All of it can be reconstructed." He leaned closer. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "But I can't rebuild this. Us. If I lose you again, it's permanent." Tears welled in her eyes. She'd expected him to leave. Expected him to prioritize the Mafia the way he always had. The way she'd convinced herself he always would. "You can't just walk away from your world," she said. "It doesn't work like that. I'm not walking away. I'm choosing differently." He met her gaze. Unflinching. "I'm choosing to trust you. To let you in. To stop trying to control everything and everyone around me." The words hung between them. Heavy with years of pain and mistakes. Daisy's voice trembled. "I don't need you to be less than what you are. I just need you to be honest. To let me stand beside you instead of behind you. Then stand beside me." His grip tightened. "Help me clean up this mess. Not as someone I'm protecting. As a partner." She studied his face. Searching for doubt. For the old patterns. For signs that he'd retreat back into the cold, controlling man who'd cast her out 5 years ago. She found none. This won't be easy, she said. Reconciliation doesn't erase what happened. The betrayal. The years apart. The damage. I know. We'll have to rebuild trust piece by piece. There will be days I can't forgive you. Days you'll regret this choice. I know. And I have secrets too. Things I haven't told you yet. Things that might change how you see me. Eggert leaned forward. Pressed his lips to her forehead. Gentle. Deliberate. Then tell me. All of it. No more walls. No more games. Daisy closed her eyes. Exhaled. 5 years of running. 5 years of surviving alone. All of it finally ending. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Love wasn't a fairy tale. It was a choice. A daily, deliberate choice that carried weight and consequence. But it was the only choice that mattered. If this story has had you on the edge of your seat, if you felt every betrayal, every bullet, every moment of these two fighting their way back to each other, then you need to subscribe. We create stories that make you feel something real. Don't miss the next one. 3 months later, the dust had settled but the scars remained. The Mendoza cartel had backed off after Eggert orchestrated a strategic alliance with their rivals, cutting off their supply routes and forcing negotiation. The Russians had been dealt with through a combination of financial pressure and targeted strikes that left their leadership reconsidering the cost of war. Marcus Vallen's network had been systematically dismantled. Every corrupt contact. Every backdoor deal. Every piece of leverage he'd built over the years. Eggert had burned it all down and rebuilt from the foundation up. But the rebuilding had cost him. Territory lost. Allies who'd proven unreliable, cut loose. A leaner organization, more loyal but smaller. His empire wasn't what it had been, and it never would be again. He'd made peace with that. Daisy stood on the balcony of their new penthouse overlooking downtown Dallas. Not the mansion they'd shared before. Not the safe houses or temporary shelters. Something new. Something they'd chosen together. Eggert joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She took one without looking. They'd fallen back into old rhythms, but different now. Earned rather than assumed. Thinking about the past, he asked. Thinking about what we lost. She turned to face him. The shoulder wound had healed cleanly, but she still favored it on cold nights. Physical reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. We're not the same people we were 6 years ago. No. We're not. She'd told him everything in those hospital weeks. The full extent of her network. The risks she'd taken. The people she'd had to become to survive. Some of it had been hard for him to hear. Some of it had reshaped how he saw her. All of it had made him love her more deeply. Do you regret it? She asked. Choosing this over absolute power? Eggert considered the question. Honest with himself in ways he'd never been before. I regret the years we lost. The pain we both carried. The mistakes I made that let Marcus destroy us. He set his glass down. Took her hand. But I don't regret choosing you. Choosing us. Not for a second. Their love wasn't the naive romance of their first marriage. It wasn't built on passion alone or the thrill of danger. It was something harder. Something forged through betrayal, blood, and the deliberate choice to trust again despite every reason not to. It was imperfect. Scarred. Real. Daisy leaned into him. Her head against his chest. His arms wrapped around her. Protective but not possessive. The future stretched uncertain before them. Threats would always exist. Rivals would always circle. The Mafia world never offered peace, only temporary truces. But they'd survived the worst of it together. Lost innocence. Lost certainty. Lost the armor they'd both hidden behind. Gained something unbreakable in return. What happens next? She asked quietly. Eggert kissed the top of her head. We build something new. Together. Whatever that looks like. No more secrets. No more secrets. No more lies. No more lies. She pulled back to look at him. Green eyes searching. Finding truth. Then I'm in. For all of it. The city lights glittered below them. Dallas alive with possibility and danger. Their world complex and unforgiving. But they'd earned their place in it. Earned each other. And that was enough.